Renee Paquette is officially All Elite, making her AEW Dynamite debut last night from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Hangman Adam Page makes references to CM Punk and the Young Bucks during last night's broadcast on TBS. Orange Cassidy is the brand new AEW All Atlantic Champion. Daniel Garcia shows his allegiance and sides with the Jericho Appreciation Society. Jon Moxley explains why he re-signed with All Elite Wrestling. Shawn Spears is back on Dynamite with an old gimmick. Helwani calls out AEW President Tony Khan for his recent interview. We've got that clip. The Acclaimed can no longer use the word scissor on Dynamite, and a former WWE tag team makes their AEW debuts. Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there are plenty of news stories to get into in the world of All Elite Wrestling. You just saw that intro. I'm starting to talk quicker than Excalibur to get in all of these AEW stories. So let's start off talking about Renee Paquette. Yes, Renee Paquette is officially All Elite. The announcement was made actually prior to Dynamite last night. And over the last couple of weeks, it was rumored that WWE was interested in bringing back Renee Paquette. However, despite WWE's reported interest in her, it was also speculated that she would turn down her former employer to share Wednesday nights with her husband, the current AEW World Champion Jon Moxley. But now we know officially what choice she has indeed made, because AEW President Tony Khan announced himself on Wednesday nights that Paquette had signed with All Elite Wrestling. Khan also said in the tweet at the time that we would see her soon, indicating that Paquette was going to make her on-screen debut, as AEW of course made its Canadian debut in Toronto last night on TBS. Now in AEW, Paquette joins her husband, three-time and current AEW World Champion Jon Moxley, who of course they married in April of 2017. They also welcomed their first child last summer. As for her overall role in AEW, obviously we got some more details on what that would be on Dynamite last night. We'll touch on that in a second. In WWE, though, she was best known as a backstage interviewer. In addition to that, she was a commentator. She was a television host. Now, there are quite a few people in AEW that currently do backstage interviews. Tony Schiavone, Alex Marvez, Lexi Nair, Mark Henry, among others as well. Now, during her time in WWE, Paquette used the name Renee Young on the air. In addition to her role as a backstage interviewer, she played a major role on WWE Backstage on FS1 and was the first full-time female commentator for Monday Night Raw. Now, in the time since her departure from WWE, Paquette went back to using her real name and also started her own podcast series, The Sessions. Now, Paquette's signing closely follows in the footsteps of her former WWE co-worker and WWE backstage partner Saraya, who made her AEW debut last month during the Grand Slam edition of Dynamite. There's now that famous picture, isn't there, of when CM Punk made his WWE return on WWE Backstage on FS1. It's Punk, Renee Young, Samoa Joe, Adam Cole and Paige. They're all elite at this point. Now, we do know what Renee Paquette is going to be doing in AEW because, of course, as I mentioned last night, Dynamite was held in Toronto, Canada, and Paquette actually opened the show by introducing herself and welcoming her hometown fans to AEW's first ever event outside the United States. Now, Paquette, seemingly overwhelmed by fans greeting her with a loud ovation, proceeded to introduce her former WWE backstage colleague Christian Cage for an interview segment. Cage took a shot at the Toronto Maple Leafs before introducing Luchasaurus ahead of his match against Jungle Boy. Now, later on in the show, Paquette interviewed the firm's Ethan Page and Stokely Hathaway in the backstage area until Matt Hardy and Private Party interrupted the backstage segment. The confrontation between the teams led to Page challenging Isaiah Cassidy to a match on AEW Rampage later on this week. Finally, though, it wasn't the only segment because Paquette caught up with Nyla Rose, Marina Shafir and Vicky Guerrero in an interview segment too. Paquette pointed out how Rose was parading around with Jade Cargill's TBS Championship, which led to Anna Jay showing up and challenging Rose for a match on AEW Rampage later that week as well. Now, after the show went off the air, Paquette thanked fans in Toronto for making her AEW debut a memorable one. She wrote on Twitter, quote, "Tonight was stupid fun. Thanks for all the really sweet messages and response to me debuting with AEW tonight. Toronto was so loud." Now, Paquette has signed a full-time contract with AEW and will be a backstage interviewer for the promotion going forward. As I spoke about previously, and you can see the screenshots of Paquette's debut there on TBS last night. As I spoke about previously, I don't just think she'll be just a backstage interviewer. I don't think she's going to wrestle. Clearly, I don't think she's going to wrestle at all. But she left WWE because she felt like she had hit her ceiling there, essentially. And she had other things she wanted to do, and her husband had left the company too. But she felt like, okay, I've been a backstage interviewer. And in WWE, that's really what it is. You just do backstage. You don't do in-ring segments or anything like that. Occasionally you might, but you're a backstage interviewer. She'd done a commentating role for Raw, which I think she did well at, but she didn't really enjoy it that much. How can you? With Vince McMahon in your ear, that can be difficult. And she'd also been a television host for WWE Backstage, and she really liked doing that. And once that was cancelled, she kind of went, well, there's nothing left for me to do, and I don't want to be on the road all the time. I'm away from my family. I'm away from my husband. She wanted to start a family too and have children, so she decided to walk away from WWE or leave once her contract expired. Now, for AEW going forward, yes, she is back in that backstage interviewer role, but AEW does treat them slightly differently. They have in-ring segments like Tony Schiavone's interviewing people in the ring. He did it with Jon Moxley last night. I don't suspect that Renee Paquette and Jon Moxley are going to do in-ring interview segments together, because it would just be, the elephant would be there in the room. Everyone knows the situation, so I don't think they would actually do that. But I do think that she will eventually take over for Tony Schiavone as the lead interviewer. I call it the Mean Gene role. We saw it in WWE in the late 80s, AWA before that. We also saw it in WCW once he moved over there, in that there's the big interviews, the lead interviews were handled by Mean Gene. They were handled in the ring. They were handled on the entrance ramp. Sometimes they were backstage. But those big moments, like an in-ring promo in AEW, is an interview segment. They always start with Tony Schiavone in the ring. Very, very, very rarely does someone come out, just grab a microphone and talk without having an announcer or an interviewer in the ring. So I suspect that Renee Paquette will take over for Tony Schiavone in that role. Of course, Schiavone did do interviews last night, and he did the big segments, and I'm sure he will be. But in the same way that Jim Ross is being gradually phased out of programming, I suspect Tony Schiavone will be gradually phased out of that role. I think he'll still be on commentary. We also know Schiavone's roles backstage with AEW as well. So I expect that to be largely the same. But I think Renee Paquette will take over for him in that. So great to see Renee Paquette back in pro wrestling, and great to see her on AEW. Now, speaking of Renee Paquette, her husband had a face-to-face confrontation with Hangman Page last night, and Adam Page during this segment seemingly made references to those who shall not be named. Now, we have not seen either the Elite or CM Punk since AEW All Out, when the four men got involved in a backstage altercation following the now infamous AEW All Out media scrum. Now, the Stars' suspensions led to the AEW World Championship and the AEW Trios Championships being vacated, and all four stars were removed from the opening intro of the show and have not been mentioned on the show by name since. Now, next week, Tuesday night's episode of AEW Dynamite from Cincinnati is set to play host to a huge AEW World Championship match when Jon Moxley puts the title on the line against Hangman Adam Page, the number one contender. Of course, Hangman earned that right by winning that Battle Royal on the Grand Slam edition of Rampage. Now, the two men went face-to-face on last night's Dynamite in a fiery promo, and Page actually made reference to every single one of the currently suspended stars. Now, Page came out and told Moxley that if he had a problem with him, he wants him to say it to his face. Now, some took that as a thinly veiled shot at CM Punk. Make your own mind up. Of course, you could argue that when Punk had something to say about Hangman, Hangman wasn't in the room. I.e., when Punk did the promo on Dynamite where he called Hangman Page out and nobody could respond because Hangman couldn't respond, even though he was there in the building. He wasn't scripted to do so, so he did not come out. The same way that CM Punk said the things about Hangman Page during that infamous post-AEW All-Out media scrum, Hangman wasn't even in the building at the time to respond to it. So some took that as a thinly veiled shot to Punk. You could argue, I can certainly see why people would say that. You could also say it's just a turn of phrase. So make up your own mind up on that one. But Page then referenced the Elite more explicitly later on in the promo. When referencing his loss at All Out, he said that he failed to win the Trios Championship alongside his best friends, and it seems week by week they're slowly starting to disappear. Of course, thus referring to the Dark Order, not the Elite. But then he said, quote, noting that my old friends are already gone. And again, that is in the sense that his old friends have indeed disappeared, but that's because they're suspended. His old best friends have been suspended too. Now, there was also, and you'll probably see it on the screen as the images continue to show here from Dynamite last night, but in addition to that, there was also some interesting merchandise being sold in Toronto last night for the Dynamite show. And it kind of teased a possible return. Now, of course, the Elite, Kenny Omega, Nick Jackson, Matt Jackson of the Young Bucks did not return last night. But there was certainly some interesting merchandise that teased the potential return of Omega alongside the Young Bucks. Now, it was actually Kyle Masters. Shout out to Kyle. He's on Twitter at All Elite Kyle. Now, he posted a photo of the merchandise store at last night's Dynamite and revealed that there is indeed a special Canadian-themed Elite shirt available for sale last night. Now, obviously, they didn't appear on the show. They weren't mentioned by name. They were referenced, as Hangman Page referenced that we just spoke about, and it remains to be seen if the Elite suspension has been lifted. But some were taking it as a good sign that they could be on their way back to programming soon. You can see the shirt in question thus there. Regarding the references themselves, I think the shirt's interesting because you could argue, well, they might have had it printed and made for ages, but there are a lot of things that AEW had planned for ages and had in store and in the works that didn't get used or haven't been used or have been cancelled because of the Bucks suspension, because of Kenny Omega's suspension, because of CM Punk's suspension. So it is curious that shirt was for sale last night. It might have just been something that was overlooked, that was planned for ages for Toronto, and then it wasn't removed from production, or it was just there, and everyone went, how did that even get out? That happens in companies. That happens in big companies. And certainly, as we hear more about the possible legal issues down the line of one party being cooperative and threatening legal action, they could certainly point to something like that. Go, wait a minute, these stars are still suspended. Why are you selling their merchandise at the event still? That's quite curious. So I thought it was just a case of something being overlooked, why that merchandise was being sold. Now, as far as the references that Hangman Page made, did he need to make them? No. He didn't need to make them. He could have had his promo last night without saying them, without referencing them, and he was fired up, saying that he maybe wasn't the man he was last year when he shoved Jon Moxley off the ladder, etc., etc. And the promo was a fiery promo. But he didn't need to make reference to the Bucks. Again, that CM Punk reference, I kind of look at that. I look at that CM Punk reference and I say, oh, was it actually reference to him? It could just be a turn of phrase. The Bucks, that is a reference to the Young Bucks. And again, that is quite curious. And I would love to know if he had cleared that ahead of time, because he must have. After everything that's happened, if Hangman Page went out there and just said something without clearing it, considering that allegedly that's where the beef between him and CM Punk started from, could you imagine if he did it again? And he's getting another world title shot. It would be insane. So hopefully we get some details as to if he cleared that, etc., or the reasons behind it. Because if he didn't, then Tony Khan would just be sitting backstage going, again? It would be wild, certainly. We have a new champion in AEW. We have a new All Atlantic champion. Orange Cassidy has won AEW Gold for the first time. In a third one-on-one match against each other, Orange Cassidy finally got the better of Pac and won the AEW All Atlantic Championship. In the main event of last night's Dynamite, Cassidy marked his first championship victory in AEW. After the match, Cassidy was joined in-ring by the best friends, Trent Beretta and Chuck Taylor, for a championship celebration that included orange confetti and a signature group hug to close out the show. Now, Cassidy had previously competed for the AEW World Championship in a triple threat match against Kenny Omega and Pac at last year's Double or Nothing pay-per-view, as well as facing Pac and the Lucha Brothers for the AEW World Trios Championships alongside the Best Friends. Cassidy has also challenged for the TNT Championship on numerous occasions against the likes of Cody Rhodes, Brody Lee, and Wardlow. Now, Cassidy and Pac met for the first time at Revolution back in 2020, and once again for the AEW All Atlantic Championship last month at the Grand Slam edition of Dynamite. Cassidy came up short in both matches, in all of these title matches, but not without taking Pac to the limit. Last week, Pac defended his All Atlantic Championship against Cassidy's best friend and stablemate, Trent Beretta, on Battle of the Bouts. But in his victory, Cassidy became the second All Atlantic Champion, marking the end of Pac's inaugural 108-day reign with the title. Pac, of course, won the All Atlantic Championship in a four-way match at the Forbidden Door pay-per-view back in June, besting Miro, Malachi Black, and New Japan Pro Wrestling's own Clark Connors. So Orange Cassidy is the new AEW All Atlantic Champion, and it must be said, it was a great way to end the show. The crowd were into it. The moment of him winning the title felt like a big deal. I still have my reservations about the All Atlantic Championship in general, that it just feels unnecessary. They've got so many championships on that show. It felt like every single segment last night featured a champion of some sort, whether it's TNT champion, Ring of Honor television champion, IWGP tag team champions, All Atlantic Championship, Ring of Honor World Championship, TBS Championship, Interim AEW Women's World Championship, AEW World Championship. It was just in every single segment. So the All Atlantic Championship, for me, still feels somewhat redundant and an unnecessary championship to have in AEW, but the match was really good. Pac and Orange Cassidy have phenomenal chemistry, and what you can't argue with is the crowd was into it. The crowd was super, super into it, and putting the All Atlantic Championship in the main event is an attempt, I would think, by Tony Khan to make the title feel like a big deal. I guess it's AEW's version of the European Championship, but ultimately the legacy of that championship, again, is a championship that was just kind of there. It was just a bit redundant, just a championship. It was a bit redundant. But it was a big moment for Orange Cassidy, and he has come such a far way from people criticizing his gimmick, and there are still people that are never going to be fans of Orange Cassidy's gimmick, but you can't argue that he can work. He can work matches, and it was a fantastic match and a great way to close the show last night. Now, speaking of championship matches, the Ring of Honor World Championship was on the line last night, and Daniel Garcia has finally revealed his true colors. The recent issues between Daniel Garcia and Chris Jericho now appear to be water under the bridge. During the title match between Ring of Honor World Champion Chris Jericho and Bryan Danielson on last night's Dynamite, Jericho looked to cheat his way to another victory by hitting Danielson with his bout while the referee was down. Garcia, the Ring of Honor Pure Champion, then ran to the ring and grabbed the bout out of Jericho's hands before clocking Danielson himself, allowing Jericho to pin Danielson for the victory. And the tensions between Jericho and Garcia had been on the rise of late, starting after Danielson defeated Garcia on the August 17 edition of Dynamite. Danielson offered his hand to Garcia as a sign of respect, and as it looked like Garcia would take it, Jericho attacked Danielson from behind before he could. Jericho then offered Garcia a bucket hat as a peace offering a few weeks later, but Garcia refused the gift. He then accepted Danielson's offer to team up the following week for a tag team match against Jericho and Guevara, all while Jericho told Garcia to come home. And it would appear that he finally has. Now, the match itself, certainly, I thought was excellent, was very well done, as you would expect Jericho and Bryan Danielson to have a great match. You always felt that Jericho would win. He's only just won the championship anyway, and clearly they're doing this honor of Jericho thing, and I think that Tony Khan is really going to leverage Chris Jericho to get a Ring of Honor television deal. So he's not going to drop the championship anytime soon. The Garcia siding with the Jericho Appreciation Society seems odd, but obviously the end goal here is still to have Chris Jericho versus Daniel Garcia. This is just you thought it was going in a linear direction, and they've decided to go in a bit of a different direction, but they are going to circle back to it. I still think that come Full Gear, which is in November, which is still about a month to go, so they've still got more story to tell, I guess, is going to be, I think, Chris Jericho versus Daniel Garcia. Unless they're going to do something else with Garcia teaming with Jericho, and that's where he turns on him, or that's where Jericho turns on him. I don't know. Maybe that's the direction that they're going to go down. I'm not sure. But clearly we're still building towards Jericho versus Daniel Garcia, and it did feel like the last few weeks of story had been somewhat redundant. When you build to Garcia siding with the Jericho Appreciation Society once again, but as I mentioned, it feels like they're trying to stretch this out a little bit longer. I think that the end goal is still Jericho versus Daniel Garcia. I would assume for both championships, maybe that's going to be a big Ring of Honor show, a big Ring of Honor main event, World Championship versus Pure Championship, Jericho versus Garcia. I would suspect that's where they go. So maybe it's not even Full Gear. Maybe it's the next Ring of Honor pay-per-view, whenever that is. And in the meantime, they have to tell this story on AEW television. That to me does make a bit of sense too. Now, Jon Moxley has, of course, re-signed with AEW, signed that 5-year contract extension, and Jon Moxley has explained his decision to re-sign with AEW. He's also spoke about these non-wrestling responsibilities, etc. In an interview with Sports Illustrated, Moxley explained what makes him a unique figure and coaching up-and-coming talents in AEW. He said, quote, "I'm a good gap between the old generation and the new generation. I come from the Les Thatcher system, so I understand paying your dues and respecting veterans. I am also old enough to know what it was like to go to the post office and send stacks of videotapes, ones I had to make to promoters. I was also there for the advent of YouTube, and I was one of the first indie wrestlers to gain a buzz by doing that. My friend had a video camera and a laptop, so I would cut promos every week on my indie shows and use YouTube to my advantage. Now, in addition to that, he also explained his reasons for re-signing with AEW. He said, quote, "I don't plan on going anywhere else. It's the best job in the world and I'm very lucky to have it. In AEW, all I worry about is wrestling. That's my focus and that's a joy. I love storytelling. I love promos. I love wrestling. I love coming up with ideas for other people. I love learning. For me, it's a perfect fit." Now, obviously, part of this deal was this exclusivity with AEW. He will continue to work for, or do appearances rather, for AEW's international partners such as New Japan Pro Wrestling, but it had been reported that AEW had basically told all of its wrestlers not to work GCW shows, and likely with Moxley, he wouldn't be working any other indie shows. This is what Moxley had to say, quote, "If there's something I want to be a part of, I'll find a way to make it happen. That's tougher now. I have my family, AEW and New Japan, but I love supporting independent wrestling, so you never know when or where I might show up." And that's essentially what had been reported and put out there, was that Moxley could work indie shows, but they might just be a surprise appearance occasionally. But AEW, basically building this company around him for the next 5 years, wants exclusivity, and they don't want a lot of their talent to work GCW shows for various reasons. So, essentially, Moxley is going to be working AEW, New Japan, and maybe the occasional indie, but that will be on a case-by-case basis. Shawn Spears is back on television, and he's got another gimmick. How many gimmicks is it for Shawn Spears? But he's back in All Elite Wrestling. During last night's Dynamite, the Embassy confronted Wardlow following their victory over the Factory's Aaron Solo and Nick Comoroto and called them out for getting involved in their business. FTR then came to the ring after a terrible Brian Cage promo. I haven't seen FTR today, so they can't be here, and FTR came out. That was ridiculous. Then FTR said they had a Canadian in mind to help him out. Shawn Spears then made his triumphant return to massive cheers from the Canadian crowd. Of course, he's from Canada. He was sporting a new shirt featuring the words Perfect 10. Obviously, a graphic appeared with the same words behind him. So it would appear that he's going back to this Perfect 10 gimmick that he used in WWE, etc. when he was Ty Dillinger. So how many gimmicks is that for Shawn Spears in AEW right now? There was what he came in as, just Shawn Spears. Then he was the chairman. Then he had the glove. Remember when he had the Ted DiBiase glove with Tully Blanchard? Then he had being part of the Pinnacle. Then he had Wardlow's kind of, I would say, backup, but he was Wardlow's manager. Now he's back to being the Perfect 10 again. But he's going to be teaming up with FTR on Rampage on Friday, so we're going to see more of Shawn Spears in AEW. This is a really interesting story because I watched this interview and I thought the same thing that Ariel Helwani thought. AEW President Tony Khan is currently under fire after a recent interview. All Elite Wrestling, of course, has been under plenty of scrutiny as of late after recent backstage drama following the All Out pay-per-view. Now, the controversy surrounding the promotion hasn't stopped Tony Khan from making appearances and doing interviews. He did one with Ariel Helwani last week promoting Dynamite's 3-year anniversary, and it was on the Helwani's YouTube channel. But the interview itself may have found the company more criticism. On the latest episode of the MMA Hour, Helwani addressed the interview and called it one of the most frustrating interviews of his career. Now, I have the clip from Helwani's show. Be sure to check it out on YouTube. There's a place to find it, the channel to find it. Underneath it, we'll put the link in the video description as well. But here's what Helwani had to say and why it was certainly frustrating for him.
Now, the Tony Khan interview. Did this interview with Tony Khan last Tuesday. It aired Wednesday night. It was for the YouTube channel. You could check it out. Look, whatever I'm going to say here is going to piss off the AEW supermarks. But I'll just say this. One of the most frustrating and, to a degree, not so fun interviews in my career. Because, as you may have seen, he didn't want to answer anything. Now, look, like, you're going to come on and promote X, Y, and Z. Great. And I'll play that dance with you. And I did at the beginning. But you got to give us something. To not even tell me, like, how you were feeling. I'm not asking for specifics on, all right, fine, I asked, is Punk going to wrestle for you? Is he coming back? You don't want to get into it? Fine. But just tell me how you were.
Now, it's funny, isn't it? Because you could argue that Ariel Helwani is somewhat biased. He works for BT Sport. He's got a good relationship with WWE. He did a voiceover for the Fight Pit match at Extreme Rules. You could argue that. But I do agree with him. I watched that interview and it was like pulling teeth. There was no answers to any questions. Now, I totally understand there are certain aspects and certain topics that Tony Khan can't talk about at the moment. When it comes to CM Punk, the Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, those issues, backstage fights, drama, you can't talk about it. If you say I can't comment on that, that's fine. But even other questions, like Helwani said, they would say, you know, how do you do this, or how are you feeling about this, or what do you think about this? And he would say, I feel about this. And obviously tonight, Dynamite, 3-year anniversary, and then we've got Rampage and we've got Battle of the Belts coming up. Like, it was just a constant plug promotion. And he does that a lot. He does it on the media calls as well, where they'll ask him a question and he'll just go off for 2 or 3 minutes. He'll lose the train of thought, and then he'll start talking about. And of course, we've got Dynamite Wednesday night, Rampage. It just always turns into promotion. He does it on social media as well. And I don't know if I should criticize him for that, because I think that might just be how he is. Tony Khan's awkward. Who isn't? I'm awkward as well in those kind of situations. But it wasn't a great interview. And it's just interesting to see Helwani call that out, certainly. The Acclaimed, they're still one of the most overact, maybe the most overact in AEW right now, but they can't use the phrase scissor meat anymore. After Billy Gunn took on Swerve Strickland, after the match, we then saw Smart Mark Sterling come out, and in a similar fashion to his announcement to the Varsity Blondes, he informed the Acclaim that he had trademarked the phrase "scissor me," and therefore they could no longer use it. He said, if you use it again, I'm going to sue you, and we'll see you in court. So that's the storyline going forward. We're seeing more of Smart Mark Sterling. Finally, the Bollywood Boys are in AEW, because last night, of course, we saw multiple television tapings at Dynamite, but the Bollywood Boys have arrived in the company. The former WWE tag team of Gurv and Harv made a surprise appearance at the Coca-Cola Coliseum in Toronto, where AEW taped an episode of AEW Dark Elevation. They went on to wrestle Austin and Colton Gunn in a tag team match, according to spoilers shared by Fightful, but we won't get into the result in case you want to watch the show. Nevertheless, the Bollywood Boys appeared on the show. I don't think they're all elite. I don't think it's a case of them signing contracts. They're from Canada. They're Canadian. So I think it's just a case of them being local, so them appearing at the tapings. We might see something else going forward, but I to be honest, I kind of doubt that. So there you go, guys. That's the latest AEW news for you today. Be sure to smash a like on the like button. Be sure to subscribe bottom right-hand corner. And of course, let me know your thoughts on today's AEW news stories in the comment section below, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.